welcome back to the Little Black Whiskey Book. Today we have not one, but two whiskeys, so we'll be adding two new pages in the notebook. And this is an Australian whiskey, which I'm pretty excited about. I haven't really tried any Australian whiskeys to date, just this so far. We did dip into it a little bit just to have a first impression. I don't like bringing something on here if it's awful, right? So I did try it out. I did enjoy it, so I thought it would be a lot of fun to share this whiskey with you guys and a little bit of the history of the company. So the brand was started by David Vitale back in Melbourne, Australia in 2007. He started raising funds, getting everything ready, getting a location, getting some people, getting all the stuff together. And they actually started working on their first whiskey in 2009. But he had a bit of a journey, right? Like, he started out as a home brewer for beer, so he didn't really start out necessarily super interested in whiskey. But the start of whiskey making has a lot in common with the start of beer making. So he was considering opening a microbrewery, but that was super competitive, and good beer really doesn't travel that well, right? Like, especially if you're just kind of making it small format, right? You're not like Molson Coors. Then it's kind of hard to sell it outside of your area, so you're kind of limited in your market. So it made a lot more sense to start a whiskey distillery. So since there wasn't like a long history of whiskey distillation in Australia, and there wasn't like a ton of different distilleries at that time, he ended up hiring some people from, he knew in the beer, kind of like home brewing, microbrewing industry, and from the winemaking, because there's a ton of winemaking going on in Australia. It's super big industry there. And they just kind of took it from a slightly different perspective, right? Like, they didn't have a lot of expectation of what it's supposed to be like going into it. So they are doing things a little differently over there, and it's definitely resulted in a unique product, which is a lot of fun. I know for some people, if you're having a whiskey, you expect it to taste a certain way or be a certain thing. So it can be a little hard at first. Like, you take that sip, you don't know what to expect, and you're just sort of like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But if you have more of an open mind, you're willing to try different things, or you're looking for kind of a gateway to get a friend of yours into whiskey, then this could be something to consider, because they do use a different sort of yeast than most people would use. Like, he actually uses a brewing yeast to get everything going for this whiskey production, and the type of yeast you use affects the flavor of it. So that's going to add something different to the flavor profile. It was also important to locally source ingredients as much as possible. So they get the barley locally, they get wine barrels actually. So instead of using ex-bourbon barrels, it's a lot easier and more practical for them to procure former wine barrels. So they get a lot of those. Everything they get is supposed to be within a day's drive of Melbourne, so nothing's from too far away, which is kind of fun. So it's really a flavor and a representation in a way of like Melbourne in a bottle. Another unique thing they're dealing with there is the climate. So in Scotland, Ireland, like those areas, even some parts of America, like you get a more consistent kind of weather experience where you have a lot of either bourbon production in like Tennessee, Kentucky area in the United States, or there's a lot popping up in the Pacific Northwest. It's a different sort of climate. So I know, as someone who lives in Chicago, I have complete sympathy with this. Apparently in Melbourne, they'll experience like 4 seasons in one day, like wide temperature swings. I get that. I feel you. So they do have not necessarily a challenge, but just a uniqueness to the amount of time they can age things and the amount of time they even need to age things, right? So a lot of what you're doing when you put the spirit in the barrel is you're trying to extract flavor from that barrel. And as the temperatures change, when it gets really hot, the wood expands. Cooler, it's going to contract, referred to as like breathing. So there's a lot of heavy breathing going on in Melbourne as it is expanding and contracting rapidly. So that causes a lot more of that flavor to be pulled and extracted from the wood in a shorter time frame. So you can think of it like this. If you're a fan of Dragon Ball Z and you remember when Goku was going to go fight Vegeta and he really needed to like become a Super Saiyan as fast as he could, and he's on that spaceship traveling to get to the planet, it was specially designed to have 100 times Earth gravity. So Goku was able to train in this environment where there was like way more gravity, and he was able to progress a lot faster than he could have if he were just training on Earth or in a normal spaceship. So it's kind of like that. It's more of an extreme environment, so it's going to mature and get enough flavor, and it's going to become ready a little faster. So if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, it's only 3 years, or it's not quite 3 years, do not worry about that. Like it's a different kind of animal, right? You can't necessarily judge it the same way. It's like a saltwater fish versus a freshwater fish. Like they're gonna have different flavor profiles and be different kinds of things. So whiskey that's created in various climates, such as like India, Taiwan, some of these other markets that are starting to create their own whiskeys, are really trying to work with and figure out how to just be themselves in the climate that they're in. And I think Starward has done a wonderful job of doing that. So they get the red wine barrels, they do a full maturation in the red wine barrels. So if you're a red wine fan, this could be a good thing. I don't think it's too tanniny, so if you don't like red wine, don't be put off by it. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to get into it. With that, let's discuss the actual bottles that I have here before us. So I've got the Nova, which is one of their core offerings, and this one, it's a single grain, so it's malted barley, and it's aged in the red wine barrels. And this one it's a single barrel, so like it's a Binny's Select. So if you happen to live in Chicagoland area, then you're going to be familiar with like the special selections that Binny's will do. So this is one of those. So this one was matured longer. It was, I think, 6 years. It says that it was aged in the barrel versus the typical around 3 years for the Nova. And this is what would have, gone into the Nova, but it forged its own destiny. It had a unique flavor profile. It got pulled out as being at least different, either exceptional in some way or unique enough that they thought it would be kind of fun to do a single offering of this. And it was available. The Binny's people picked it up. There's a few different ones there, so if you're looking, be sure to check the notes. And on the cards in front of the different bottles, it'll explain like this bottle was selected because it had more of these notes. And it'll say on the bottle as well a little bit. So I picked out one of these to see, not that it didn't make the cut to become Nova, but it was its own unique whiskey that forged its own path. So I thought it'd be fun to try them side by side just to see some of the differences. But we'll get started with just the regular Nova. So as you can see, this is fairly dark color. It was aged for its entire life in red wine barrels, so that's not too surprising. What's interesting is the other one spent a lot more years in it and didn't pull as much color, so that's one reason I don't like to necessarily assign a lot of value to that, except for how cool it'll look in a cocktail. I do like the darker ones in a nice cocktail. But yeah, we're at like a nice deep amber over here, so it is lovely to behold. And you do pick up a lot of those fruit notes. You're getting like a fresher berry, like a lighter berry, so it's more like strawberry, raspberry, even some apple, like not like a tart green apple, but more like a Fuji, like a sweeter red apple. And it's hard to make a whiskey without a little vanilla notes, so we have some of that in there, which is just lovely with the berries. I also don't think they char the barrels very much. It was mentioned on the website like a light char. I'd be curious to find more information about how they do that, because they were saying they get the barrels from the wineries. They'll give them a steam just to kind of sanitize it. They're very proud in saying like it's still wet from the wine, but if they're charring it, I don't know what that seems a little strange to me, but nevertheless, anyway, the sweetness isn't like caramely is the point of that story. I will say this has a nice mouthfeel. If you like the ones that are a little richer, like it just feels like there's a little more like viscosity or thickness to the consistency, I think you would enjoy this. It's really nice on the palate. And then you're getting definitely the fruits, and it's also kind of like if you had fresh bread baking in the oven, so it's like that very warm bread kind of feel, and then with the fresh berries, and then that richness, right? It's like you've got some heavy whipping cream on there, like the vanilla in there, so it's like you've got berries and cream on like some nice fresh bread. And it's really beautiful for summer. I wish I had found this a little earlier in the season because this would be a really nice spring-summer kind of whiskey. I also feel like it would stand up in a cocktail. I know they sell pre-made cocktails and they do have a lot of cocktail recipes. With it being more the fresh berry, I feel like the addition of like cherry, which is more of a darker sort of berry flavor, and then like a little bit of orange, you're just going to be getting some more of that complexity, right? Like in a regular whiskey, you kind of get those notes anyway. So in a Manhattan, it's kind of just like more is more, but this would be not just more, but it would be different. So I think this would be a lot of fun to have in a cocktail. So crazy is one thing I don't notice, especially on the finish. With a lot of like younger bourbons, I'll get kind of like that sort of mentholy flavor on the back end. There's really none of that here, which is kind of crazy considering like this is definitely on the young end in order to become considered a whiskey in Australia for their legal purposes. It only has to age for 2 years. And so this is, between 2 and 3 years, or even 4, right? Like they're going around to the barrels or checking them. They're monitoring the situation. And given how extreme the weather can be, it may either be ready faster or a little slower. But yeah, there's none of that you would normally expect in a very young whiskey. And there isn't a ton of like pepperiness or spice. Like there's definitely some there, but it doesn't feel like it overwhelms the lighter berry flavors. It just pairs nicely with them. So it's more of like a light chili or a black pepper, like nothing too intense like a white pepper or anything like that. And it doesn't peak very high. You just sort of the spice will kind of creep up on you, or the heat will creep up on you a little bit, and then it just nicely fades off. Like you still notice it there, so it just accentuates the berry flavor. Yeah, this would be a fun summer sipper or a good gateway if you're trying to get someone who enjoys red wine into whiskey. And with that, let's move on to the next whiskey. We have a single barrel. So this is matured for 6 years in second fill red wine barrels. And this little label was specially selected for Benny's, but they do these with other companies, or at least you can get them on their website. I think they call it a captain's pick or something like that. So it's not like it's exclusive. It's just these happen to have been selected by the person who does the picking at Benny's. I feel like I trust this person. Like I've never had one of these Benny Selects and been disappointed. So super excited. I've had a little bit of this already, but I can't wait to get into it again. It's definitely different than the Nova. So let's try some. I just love these bottles. So with Star Wars, there's a space theme, right? Like Goku flying through space on that spaceship, training extra hard. So they've got like the star patterns, very celestial. It's really kind of a fun, pretty bottle. I will say, I don't know what it is with this cork, but it isn't like a cork. The stopper, I guess would be the more proper term. I feel like it's like a rubber one. And with this bottle, I have a much harder time putting it back in than with the Nova. I mean, it could just be a me thing. I don't know. But anyway, that's an interesting side note. But yeah, so it's crazy. This one's definitely lighter in color. This is like a deep honey versus like the rich amber in the other, even though it was aged for longer. Maybe because this is a second fill. No, that has nothing to do with it. That's just more wine. That would be more color. Who knows what goes on in those barrels? Well, we know some of what goes on in those barrels. But yeah, this one I'm definitely getting more of like the oakiness that you'd expect. Again, it spent more time in there, right? So you're going to pull more of that flavor. Still vanilla. A little honey, I think. From sweetness. Again, they don't toast it as much, so you're not going to get like a caramel or a toffee. It's going to be a much lighter kind of sweetness. Like almost a touch floral. Like if it were a sweet smelling flower, maybe that's closer, like a sweet flower smell instead of it being honey, but we'll see. So the other crazy thing about the aging process in Melbourne is there's a lot more of a dry season And there, they'll actually increase the amount of alcohol the longer it matures in the barrels. So this one definitely has more of that kind of alcohol flavor to it than the Nova did. I'll have to check the proof now, I'm curious. So this is 114 proof. And then the Nova, yeah, so the Nova is 41%, so that would be a lower. So that's definitely a lower proof. Like decently lower. Like this is 57 and that's 40. That's a huge difference. It's wild. So I guess they don't really have an angel share over there, which is interesting. I don't know quite what to make of that. So with that higher alcohol percentage, I don't feel like you get quite the same richness in the mouthfeel. It doesn't feel as wet or as light as other whiskeys. There is still a nice mouthfeel to it, but it's not as much as the Nova. Again, much higher alcohol percentage in this one. It's crazy, like this almost smells sweeter to me than the Nova, which is kind of mind-blowing because it doesn't taste that way, right? Like we just had some, well, at least I just had some. Hopefully you're sharing. If you are, cheers. Yeah, there's definitely like a honey sweetness in here, but it isn't, okay, so, I mean, it does say directly on here, like that's how much of the honey flavor there is. It's the Manuka honey. So ladies, you probably know if you've ever purchased this for like making your own at-home facial. Manuka honey is very popular. It has a lot of antibacterial properties. If you've used it for like wound care or something, then you've probably tried it. If not, it's pretty expensive and it's not super easy to find in stores, so you may not have had that honey. But yeah, it's definitely a more unique kind of honey flavor, so to have them call that out on the barrel, like it's, or not the barrel, on the bottle, it definitely has that flavor for sure. I forget what else they said it had on there, but it's still the lighter berry notes, right? It's like the strawberry, but with it being more oaky, it just kind of reminds me of like the strawberries my grandmother used to prepare. So she would go strawberry picking every summer at one of those like you-pick farms in like the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. And then she would do like a canning, like jar all of these strawberries. So we'd have them like all year long. And they definitely had like a different, more like earthy kind of flavor. So it was like berry, but it wasn't like those mutant California strawberries that you're going to get in the store. So this reminds me of those strawberries specifically. I don't know, it's kind of like a niche tasty note. That's what's so much fun about doing this is I could be sharing this bottle with another person in the room and I'll taste something and they'll be like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of this like one super niche thing, like the exact strawberries my grandma used to make. And they're going to look at me like, okay. So yeah, if you don't necessarily have some of the same background or have tried some of the same foods, then you might not experience things in quite the same way, even though you're literally having the same whiskey. You're having a different experience, which is why it's so much fun to share this and to talk about it with other people, because that's the only way you can kind of understand like their perspective and their experience. Even though you're having the experience together, it's different, and that's just so beautiful. Yeah, with this single barrel one, you're definitely getting more of that heat, right? It's got the higher alcohol percentage, so it's more of like the pink peppercorn, white pepper, more of that heat. And it isn't quite as subtle as it is in the Nova, which is, it's fun, right? Like this would probably honestly stand up a little better in terms of like feeling like there's something in your cocktail. Whereas with the Nova, it will taste super delicious and probably be a little dangerous. Whereas you're gonna know like, oh, I need to take this one a little easy. There's some alcohol in here. But dang, this is pretty darn sippable. So yeah, I would say the single barrel, they're going to be so different, right? So whichever one you find is going to be not quite the same as this, which is the excitement between the single barrels. But I think for this exact barrel, I'd describe it as having a little more vanilla forward, a little more sweetness, but balanced with the heat. And you still get some of that berry flavor, but it's not quite as pronounced. And I don't really notice that same kind of warm bread, like that fresh bread experience. Like I feel like it's more oaky at that point, right? So it's not as fresh. It's going to be a little more earthy in that way. So they're both delightful and a wonderful experience, each in their own sort of way. Please let me know what I should try next, either from Australia or from Starward themselves. I'm kind of curious about the twofold. where they blend some of the whiskeys that they would have used in the Starward with, I forget the other grain, I think it's a wheat-based whiskey, if I'm not mistaken. But the twofold I'm curious about. Please let me know if you've had any of these others and which one I should try first. But please, if you've enjoyed your time here, give this video a thumbs up. It's really helpful. And subscribe to enjoy some more pages that we'll write together in the little black whiskey book. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one.